What it do, cuckolds? It's your boy, the Hater, and I'm driving in the rain, so it's a mixture of hater on the road as well as hater in the rain, cucks. Now, I wanted to do a video inspired by a few comments that I saw in some of my videos. Now, the comments are very diverse and talk about different things, but there is a common thread. And the common thread, of course, relates back to one of the main topics of this channel, which is the analysis of mediocrity and the fight against it. Now, some people seem to not understand what the comparison point is, right? Different situations merit different scales, right? For example, if you go to the mall, right, the standard for an attractive girl or an attractive guy might be one thing. But if you go to, like, I don't know, Miss Universe, the standard for an attractive girl is gonna be much higher, right? So, you know, within the context of, like, if you take the most beautiful woman theoretically from each country and you have them compete against each other, right? Then perhaps Miss Slovenia, who might be a 10 out of 10 in every other context, is no longer a 10 because now we have to apply a new scale. You understand what I'm getting at here, right? Maybe she's only a 7 in the contest of the most beautiful women in the world, right? Maybe she falls in the 70th percentile, right? In other words, we don't judge Miss Slovenia in the same context that we judge the Starbucks barista, let's say, or the accountant, because she is in a different level, she's in a different league, and she's in a different competition. You understand? Likewise, in wrestling, this is how things used to be, but no longer, right? Here's the problem. In the past, it used to be like, you know, being 6'3" in wrestling was short, right? Let's leave it at that. It was short. Now, some people are like, wait a second, I didn't realize 6'2" isn't short, like isn't tall. Yeah, in real life, 6'2" is approaching on tall. I would say 6'3" is when you can start reasonably saying that's a tall guy or a tall girl even, right? Well, for girls, obviously it's different, but you know what I mean, right? 6'3" can be like, that dude's tall. 6'2", he's like, all right, he's like a normal guy, right? Anywhere between like 5'8", 5'7", 5'8", to like 6'1", 6'2" is like normal range. Like if you're 5'7", you're not short as hell. I mean, you're obviously not tall, that's what I'm saying, right? You're average, right? And the average is not just like one number, there's a range, right? You know, but in wrestling, this range is different. It's as simple as that. And people, like, they look to their left, they look to their right, and they say to themselves, well, I'm 5'6", and, you know, Seth Rollins is 6 foot, so he's really tall. Yeah, compared to you, but I have news for you, pal. Unless you're Rey Mysterio, you're never gonna make it as a wrestler at 5'6", right? Unless you're Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, or some other, like, exceptional type wrestler, right? You just aren't gonna make it because, quite frankly, nobody gives enough of a shit to see, like, small people do things, right? The reality is, big people draw, right? There are exceptions, right? These exceptions are exceptions for a reason. For example, Floyd Mayweather was and arguably still is a massive draw. But Floyd Mayweather is charismatic. He has a gimmick, right? He can talk big in fights, and he's undefeated. And he's also an exceptional boxer. So yes, if you have all those qualities, you might draw more. But there's no way that Floyd Mayweather would ever draw more than Muhammad Ali if Muhammad Ali was boxing today. There's just no way. Because Muhammad Ali is better than him. He's more charismatic. And quite frankly, he's a heavyweight. And heavyweights draw, right? That's just how it works. Now, in wrestling, when I say Jacob Fatu is small, like, let's say he's built at 6'2". He's probably like 6 foot. 6 foot is not small by any reasonable metric, aside from the reasonable metric of wrestling and other ones as well. For example, if someone's like, for example, Tony Parker, right? Tony Parker is like, what, 6'3"? Tony Parker, the NBA player. Steve Nash, right? Steve Nash seems like a short guy, but I'm sure Steve Nash was relatively tall. All right, let's look it up. Steve Nash. You know what I'm saying? 2-time MVP. How tall does this fuck? Why don't they just tell us immediately? You know what I mean? 6'3". Steve Nash is 6'3". He's a tall guy. Like, if you were walking in the mall and you saw Steve Nash, you'd be like, wow, that's a tall dude, right? Tony Parker, probably 6'3" as well. You'd be like, that's a tall dude. But in the NBA, they're short. Like, in the NBA, they're not even average. They are short as fuck, right? Like, you have, like, Shaquille O'Neal next to Steve Nash. Shaquille O'Neal just towers over him. And Steve Nash is a tall guy. That's what wrestling used to be. right? Because obviously in the NBA, the taller you are, the better you're going to be at basketball. So, which is generally like a pretty good axiom. It's not always true, obviously, but it's generally true. So with all that being said, the same thing used to apply to wrestling, right? Not just with height, but with size. So, Jacob Fatu is billed at 6'2". We're just going to go with that because we don't have any, we don't know exactly how tall he is. He's obviously shorter, but, 6'2" is what we're going to go with because that's how they're presenting his bitch ass. Now, we look at Val Venus, right? I just Googled Val Venus, 6'3", 244 pounds. Looks like a god, right? Now, you tell me, motherfucks. You tell me in what world. Like, Val Venus was considered small back in the day. He never got the credit he deserved for having an incredible physique, right? Val Venus had a better physique than like 95% of the roster. But he was 6'3". He wasn't 6'4" and above. Triple H, The Rock, all these guys like 6'4", 6'5". Stone Cold is an exception. He's the Mayweather, basically, right? There are exceptions, as we've explained. But generally speaking, the standards were different, right? And it's also about size. Like, if you look at Jacob Fatu and you look at Val Venus and you ignore the propaganda of Samoans being, presumably tougher than they actually are, right? As far as I know, Puka Nakua, or is that whatever his name is, and fucking Tonga Valoa in the NFL, they took like one hit each and they're out for like the season, basically. So there goes that stereotype, just debunked completely. Jacob Fatu is 6'2", and like he's no more than 230. You know what I mean? He might be like 250 because he's fatter than Val Venus, but that's about it. Like, it's like no reasonable person would look at Val Venus and Jacob Fatu and think that Jacob Fatu is the superior of the two, right? It's just absurd. Like, in his prime, Val Venus would destroy the entire, like in his prime, Val Venus would destroy Roman Reigns. Like, if it weren't for the fact that Roman Reigns is a handsome guy, Val Venus has more attributes than Roman in being a main eventer. And he was a mid-carder, a solid mid-carder, but not even an upper mid-carder in the Attitude Era, right? So the standards have significantly fallen. That's why when I say things like Seth Rollins would never make in the Attitude Era, it's because, like, if you put him next to Val Venus, right, the only way you're going to convince anybody that he's better than Val Venus is to book him better than Val Venus. And you could, of course, right? You could take fucking anybody in the world and book them to be WWE champion, right? David Arquette was booked to be WCW champion, and people look down on that. Why? Now they're like retconning it. They're gaslighting the situation to suggest that people were mad that David Arquette wasn't one of the boys. No, nobody gave a shit about that at all, right? If you were there during that time, you would know that nobody cared at all about the fact that he wasn't a pure wrestler. Nobody cared about that shit back then, right? No one cared about these concepts. People were angry because one reason only. He is not believable as a champion. And it devalues the title, right? Because when you put David Arquette next to DDP, or next to Booker T, or next to Goldberg, or like if you made the mistake of putting him next to Scott Steiner, you would realize quickly that there is a difference between these two, right? And you'd be like, oh, this guy just doesn't fit. Like, everyone is bigger and stronger looking than David Arquette. It's not because he didn't pay his dues. That's some weird ass, 2010 and beyond concept, right? That's like some cuck nonsense from, like, I don't want to say the woke people, but generally, like, people are like, you gotta pay your dues, you gotta follow the rules. There's a bunch of fucking hall monitors. Nobody cared about these things back then. And that's just how it is, and that's how it was back then as well. So, with that in mind, it's like, when we look at, like, this person's a star or that person's a star, we have to have caveats. Like, every time I say things like this, like, when I say Braun Breaker is a star, I am saying, right, the implied part, the part that I don't say out loud is, given the current landscape of wrestlers today, Braun Breaker is going to be a star. That's what I'm trying to say, essentially, right? Absolutely not. In no way, shape, or form do I look at Braun Breaker and think this guy's better than Val Venus. Absolutely not. And nobody should. No reasonable person would think that, right? What does he do better than Val Venus? Fucking nothing. I mean, he's more explosive, and you can argue he's better in the ring, but it doesn't matter because Val Venus was like a character. He wasn't there to do leg locks. Like, Braun Breaker doesn't have a character. He's just a guy, right? And it works, But you look at Val Venus, and you look at Braun Breaker, and you think to yourself, like, if this was a real fight, like Val Venus is like 6 inches taller than him, he would brutalize him. I don't care if Braun Breaker played football. I don't care. You know what I'm saying? Like, size matters, motherfucks. Braun Breaker in real life is like 210, 220 pounds, maybe even less, right? He's a muscular guy, but he's only like 5'10". So, like, he can't be that big. You know what I mean? as in the words of legendary rapper Nelly, he's 5'6", 153. How big can he possibly be? You know what I'm saying? It's exactly like that. It's like, oh, there are limits to this. So what I'm getting at here is this. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, right? When I say this person is going to be a star, I'm saying because you look to their left and you look to their right and you have Braun Breaker, and then next to him, you have like Ilya Dragunov, who I can't hate on because he's clearly like peak physical condition. Like this guy works out hard. He's just small, right? He's just built lean. You know, so this guy doesn't look like a star. Then you have Obafemi, who's fat, right? Then you got like a bunch of other people like Trick Williams, who doesn't have the charisma and the personality to do it. You have Carmelo Hayes, who has all the tools, but is very small, right? Then you have, it's a mix of like fat dudes and small dudes. There's not like, and then somewhere in there is Braun Breaker. Everybody else is like either looks like shit. Now, again, when I say looks like shit, right? Like, there's no doubt about it. Like, Gunther is a big guy, right? Who, in many different contexts, would have a great physique, right? He's leaned out now. He's muscular enough. Like, if he wears a shirt, he looks like an athlete, right? No doubt about it. But we're not comparing him to me and you and the people that we see at the gym, even though at the gym you'll find people bigger than Gunther, like every day, of course, right? We're comparing him to the archetype of the wrestler, right? If you compare Gunther to Sami Zayn, yeah, he looks like a star. But if you compare him to Brock Lesnar or Booker T, it's like you would think like, who's the fat ass, right? In the words of Scott Steiner, who's the fat ass? That's what they would say when they see Samoa Joe, right? That promo is great. I'm gonna do a promo review of that at some point, right? You'd be like, this guy does not look like a star in the slightest, right? Again, right? No doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that if I was at the mall, right, or if I was at Starbucks and Obafemi walked in, I'd be like, wow, that's a big motherfucker, right? And that would be justifiable, right? However, he is not larger than life. I'd be like, oh, okay, and then I'd move on and order my coffee. I wouldn't be in awe. I wouldn't think about this, right? I'll give you a great example. I was at a hookah bar one time in Tokyo, Japan. That's right, the haters well traveled up in this bitch. They don't call me the ghost of Shibuya for nothing, right? So I was in Shibuya in Tokyo, and I went to the hookah bar, and these two enormous dudes come in. They were like some type of Scandinavian, like, you know, long blonde hair, like just the two biggest motherfucks I've ever seen in my life. And there must have been some sort of strongman competition or something in Tokyo, which is weird because why would they be at the hookah bar, right? But these two guys were like the literal number one and number two biggest guys I've ever seen. So it's not a coincidence, right? It's like, what are the odds of there's these two big motherfucks who are clearly foreigners that are here together, right? These guys, like I'll never forget these guys. They were fucking enormous. You know what I mean? You're like, holy shit. Where do they find these two motherfuckers? And like, in what tundra, in what icy hell did you go and pick these two guys out from, right? Same thing, like one of my buddies, when I was in law school, my buddy went to this diner in Newark, New Jersey, right? And Shaquille O'Neal was there, right? It's a very famous diner in Jersey. And Shaquille O'Neal was there. And my friend, who's like 6'3", he's a tall guy, he took a picture with Shaq. And like, he showed me the picture and I was like, what the fuck? And he's like, dude, he's like, Shaq is enormous. Like, any idea you have of how big he is, he's much bigger than anything you could think of, right? These are otherworldly people, right? Obafemi's not one of them, right? Bobby Lashley is one of them. Brock Lesnar is one of them. Batista was one of them because now he's like all lean. Now he's like, you know, he's like 220 pounds and like, you know, he's skinny and shit. You know, it's kind of weird, honestly. But that's what happens, right? The point I'm trying to make is rather self-evident, right? We have to, unfortunately, adjust the scales, right? We're not going to see another Rock in wrestling ever again, right? So the best we've got is Roman Reigns. So when I say Roman Reigns is a star, he's like, you know, he's a big deal, I'm saying within the context of his cohort, right? Outside of his cohort, he doesn't fit in at all. Like, you could look at Roman Reigns and you could look at Ken Shamrock, right? And let's say you didn't even know that Ken Shamrock was an MMA legend, right? You would think immediately Ken Shamrock would brutalize this guy in 5 seconds. Like, he would just break him in half. Steve Blackman, right? I'm talking about jobbers at this point. Hardcore Holly, right? Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, even the small guys, they looked legit. They all were chiseled out of stone. And I'm talking about the Attitude Era and Ruthless Aggression. I'm not even going to go into like comparing people like Roman Reigns to like alpha specimen like fucking Rocky Johnson, Tony Atlas, Rick Rude, the Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan. These are people that are like, they really are otherworldly. These are people that are like, yo, you don't find them like that anymore, right? Like these are like 80s type bodybuilders. These guys are just like perfect physiques. Like Rick Rude, have you seen Rick Rude's physique? It's like perfect. Like you wouldn't change anything. He's just like incredibly chiseled, you know? You're never gonna see that again. You know? The best you're gonna get is gonna be like, I don't know, like fucking who's like Finn Balor. Like that's considered a great physique now. And it is. Like if you look like Finn Balor, if you have Finn Balor's body, if you have his physique, and you go to the pool, people are gonna be like, damn, that guy's in fucking amazing shape. Of course they're gonna say that. But if you put that guy next to Rick Rude in a fucking bodybuilding contest, we're gonna be like, who's the tiny guy? Get his jobber ass out of here. And that's the problem, right? We expect, or when I say we, I mean me. I expect excellence from the product because I assume that wrestlers and the WWE in general want to draw money. They want to make an impact. They want to, I don't know, preserve their status. They want to be able to say, hey, we're doing good. Now, if you're doing good, that's perfect, right? If you're not doing well, which is exactly what's happening, I can't wait to see the ratings for Raw. I bet you it was like less than last week. If you're not doing well, then you got to change it up. Then you got to ask yourself, oh, holy shit, wait a second. Maybe the indie guys, like, don't draw money, and that's why they ended up in the indies. Wow! Who would have thought? While WWE was creating Randy Orton, John Cena, Brock Lesnar, and others who are in that cohort, people like Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens had to go to the indies because they weren't good enough, right? That's what happened. And now they're in WWE. And surprise, surprise, looky, milk and cookie, they're not drawing any viewers. Wow. It's almost like the people that worked in bingo halls can draw bingo hall sized groups. It's as simple as that, cucks. It's as simple as that. And that's the problem. That's the issue that I have with wrestling in contemporary times. You know, people refuse to accept the truth. And the truth is that you need excellence to draw excellent numbers, right? The writing is shit. The gimmicks are shit. The booking is shit. But at the source of all this, you can even maybe overcome all of that. Like if you had like a bunch of Rick Rudes running around, right? People be like, okay, shit, I want to see which Rick Rude, which one of these monsters is the number one, right? That's why people get excited for heavyweight boxing fights. That's why, like, for example, Francis Ngannou, he didn't do anything that impressive in the UFC. He became UFC champion, which is nice, but he didn't do anything that crazy to merit the fact that now he wants to go into boxing. He was never a good boxer. He never had any skills outside of like, you know, just throwing an overhand and hoping that it hits, right? And in the UFC, like boxing defense and defense in general is so shit that like you can win with that kind of strategy because they don't have like a lot of technical skill in the UFC. So, but beyond that, like it's like, you know, if you have like, I don't know, Sean O'Malley, right, who's a much better boxer, you know, nobody cares. Sean O'Malley's like, I want to call out Gervonta Davis. Like nobody fucking knows who Gervonta Davis is because Gervonta Davis is like 130 pounds. Like nobody gives a shit about him, even though he's an exceptional boxer, right? Like Errol Spence. Like, there's a lot of good boxers in the little man category. And when I say little man category, I basically mean anything that's not heavyweight. If you're not a heavyweight, nobody gives a shit, right? The only exception now is like Canelo Alvarez, and that's largely due to the Mexican market and to the fact that he is also exceptional, right? And at the end of the day, people get more excited about Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury, or you know, Tyson Fury versus Ngannou than they ever will about Gervonta Davis and and Sean O'Malley. Even though Gervonta Davis and Sean O'Malley will be a better boxing fight if it happens, or whoever the fuck Sean O'Malley decides to go fight. Like it's gonna be like Ryan Garcia. I don't know. It's gonna be a better boxing match because Sean O'Malley is an excellent boxer, right? I would say he's like top 2 strikers in the UFC. So with that being said, it's like people care about the big guy, and in WWE, nobody seems to like even acknowledge this anymore, right? And now the standard has been lowered so much, right, that people think that Obafemi is going to have this megastar career. And I'm not trying to pick on him, right? But he reminds me a lot of Albert. Remember Albert, A-Train, Tensai? Tensai was excellent in the ring. He was just as good as Obafemi. Obviously, he was better, right? Tensai had a much more unique look, right? With the piercings and the back hair, and he just looked like a brute, right? But at the end of the day, nobody gave a shit because he's Tensai, right? He's a fat guy, motherfuckers. He's a fat guy. Nobody cares about fat dudes in wrestling, right? Except for Kevin Owens, which will never happen again, hopefully. You understand what I'm getting at? The point is, better wrestlers are the step one of improving WWE. And if you don't want to get better wrestlers, then you're fucked. Then it's over, motherfuckers. It's over. Because eventually, people are going to continue to see Butch and Seth Rollins and be like, oh, what the fuck is this? These are like two regular guys wrestling, right? It's the kind of shit that you'd watch in the indies. Like literally, you can go to your local indie fed and you'll find guys that have the physique of Rollins and guys that have the physique of Butch. You'll find these guys easily. You know what I mean? Easily. So why the fuck am I watching Butch? He's better at it? No, he's not. Why is he better? It's a fake sport. So with that being said, motherfuckers, take care of yourselves and take this to heart. Cut golds.